Hello everyone, GMDM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. It is time for your Friday recap and for another moment of Zeneca. We're doing back-to-back weeks, moments of Zeneca, because we love him so much. Welcome back, Zen. How you doing?
Doing great. Happy to be here. How you doing?
I'm good. Also joining us is Gavin Purcell, the one and the only Fonky Donk. Hey, man.
Hi there. Hello.
So, lots to talk about today. I do have to do a couple admin notes before we dive into the show. The most important one being, we are postponing the 5th stop of the Overpriced Happy Hour tour. So we were supposed to be in Los Angeles. If you're listening to this today, this drops today, Friday, July 7th. Betty had a family emergency and had to head back to Australia. We were trying to keep the event and maybe just get a new guest in. It was just too short notice to try and make something happen. So we are postponing it. So please, 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 if you are in Los Angeles and we're planning to come, do not show up at Canvas Gallery tonight, Canvas Gallery. We will not be there, but we are working very quickly to get it rescheduled. So thank you everyone for your patience on that. We'll have an announcement about that soon. I think that's my big one. And again, updates coming very soon about Overpriced Gin. I did tweet a picture of one of the first bottles. They've officially bottled it. So we have some photos of the bottles from the bottling plant. So that was very fun. And with that, we do need to hear a word from our lovely sponsors before we dive into today's show. Y'all know the phrase, not your keys, not your crypto. Well, in a world where too many people have had to learn that the hard way, Overpriced JPEGs is proud to partner with Ledger, the world leader in critical digital asset security. Ledger's Nano S Plus and Nano X hardware wallets, paired with the Ledger Live app, Ledger's own software for setting up your Nano device and managing your crypto assets, is the easiest way to start your crypto journey while maintaining full control of your digital assets. You can use all your favorite dApps with Ledger Live, accessing 15 plus Web3 apps, including 1inch, Paraswap, Lido, and Zerion. So you can not only manage, but also grow your portfolio. And Ledger Live is available on mobile and desktop. Securing digital assets shouldn't be complicated. Ledger is as easy as it gets. Uncompromising security, effortless connectivity, full transparency, Ledger is your one-stop shop to trade and track crypto, grow your assets, and manage NFTs. Secure your future with Ledger. Visit shop.ledger.com today or check out the link in the show notes. All right, guys. We always start out with market vibes. How are you guys feeling? Can we call it peak market capitulation, or are we like afraid that there's more to come? I'm always afraid of calling them the bottom at this point.
I know.
I called
it like it earlier, right?
Ago. I called it so poorly. I called it so poorly.
So actually, this is really funny. I was writing a newsletter last night and going back over some of my old ones to reference them. And I wrote a newsletter called The Current NFT Bear Market, dated September 2021. Like, I guess it was 2 weeks where prices went down a bit, and I was like, oh, I guess this is a bit of a bear.
Well, that was a weird moment because there was a moment, I think it was early October 2021 when ETH went crazy.
And gas was
all
wild.
NFTs were so, like, this goes back to my Anonymized was one of my first big projects in the space, and I love it. It's a great on-chain project. It was very cool. Ran to 13 and then very quickly ran back down to like 2 by the end of the year. And it's like that was that moment at the end of 2021 where like NFTs, people think of NFTs as like they had this kind of up-only moment, but there was a time when ETH was really expensive and NFTs, like it was also around the Wizards and Dragons launch, which was just like a kind of a weird shit show that whole time. So it was a weird one.
I remember I called it a bear market in one of the episodes from November. I was looking back, Zeneca, with the interview I did with you in like November of 21, same deal. I was like, well, you know, this like little bear that we're in. And I was like, oh, darling. So, oh, sweetie.
Yeah.
Where do we want to start? Do we want to talk just like we talked about Azuki last week? Do we want to talk about where we're at with Azuki now? I have one
thing that might lead into this, which I think that's interesting. There was this insane capitulation kind of in the last week, right? Which it was based a lot of ways on what I think was Azuki FUD, the combination of the captain's reveal, which weirdly I had no idea was going to happen that closely to what it was. And we'll get into this. It wasn't really a true reveal. There has been a bounce, which isn't terrible, right? Like there was, and maybe it's a dead cat bounce, so who knows?
I'm like rolling my eyes at that. I'm like, I guess.
Yeah. But like it definitely felt, it was one of those situations, I'm sure, you know, both of you recognize this, but I remember I've been doing some research, a lot of research on different projects, and I've looked at a bunch of DeGod's stuff, and like there were all these tweets from all these projects which were just like, you know, these are the tough times we have to get through. And I was like, oh, this is what happens when the market collapses. Like every project says, we have to just stick through this. We have to be through this. And that's where kind of everybody's at right now is like, hold tight. The plane might be going down, but we have to figure out what's going on.
Zeneca, you wrote a piece about what's happened to the NFT market. I haven't finished it, but I started it. I always love your pieces. Want to give us an overview of that?
So I mean, obviously we've had this collapse of the NFT market. Like even like if we look at like the last 12 months, 6 months, 3 months, but then especially this last week, and it was just me like trying to dig into like why did it happen? And it all comes down to supply and demand at the absolute end of the day. It's like the supply just continually goes up. Like Azuki released another 20,000 to their ecosystem. Every project, like every new project that mints, there's more supply. And I think in a macro sense, demand has never been lower. You look at like NFT, Google Trends for the word NFT or the phrase, it's like all-time lows. There's no new money entering. And so it's not surprising that prices are trending lower. And I think another thing is that a lot of these PFP projects are built on like hype and speculation and Ponzi-nomics, where like they're just releasing new tokens. And when capital runs out and then there's like a massive liquidity event like the Azuki mint, it just cascades. And then you have things like, NFT financialization, so Blend and Paraspace and BendDAO, where people can take out collateral against their NFTs and then get liquidated. It's like all of that together. It's not surprising that this happened. Obviously, it's unfortunate that it happened. And you go back to 2021 as well, and everyone said 99% of NFTs are going to zero. 99, more than everything. And now we're starting to see kind of like the reality.
Yeah, we just didn't know it was going to be 100%. We just didn't know 100% of NFTs were going to zero.
So like in that 1%.
I thought there was 1% that was going to,
I was going to say, I think that's absolutely true. I think the thing, I wrote a piece a week ago for our newsletter.
Are we going to re-up our supply and demand debate?
Exactly.
Gavin?
Well, so this is what I was going to say. The moment that I kind of isolated as the supply and demand kind of peak was the other side mint.
Yes.
Which was, to me, the first step towards delivering too many NFTs for a market that didn't have the demand for it, right? The other side minted 55,000 NFTs to people in the Apes ecosystem or outside. They took a lot of ETH out. But I think, Zen, you're 100% right. To me, this is a factor of way too few people trying for way too many assets. And of course it's going to go down. That is just the way economics work. And yes, are there problems with this space? Have there been teams that have screwed up continually? Yes, and yes. But eventually, if the people who participate go down and the supply goes up, it just makes sense from an economic standpoint that prices go down.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that. Gavin and I were having a little bit of a debate when he was writing that piece, because I feel like there are other, and I can't remember, context is everything. Like I've already forgotten all of the context in that piece that you were working on, Gavin, and the debates we were having. But like my thing is, part of what's happening too is people starting to do the exact math of like, if I own a Yuga asset, what am I getting for that? And they're going, okay, I'm getting access to like a kind of vague gaming ecosystem with no defined delivery date. That's not worth $80,000 to me. And that's sort of the impetus. Like if people thought that there was going to be more airdrops that would be worth something, if people thought like they would be holding, they wouldn't be selling, right? So it's not just as simple as like supply demand, like, hey, we have to start dropping the costs of our goods because we don't have enough people wanting to buy the goods relative to the number of goods we have. It's also this psychological thing that's changing in the space, which is people are starting to say like, A, there's probably not going to be more airdrops from this team, or B, this isn't really the social status anymore. And that's what's also causing people to dump. We'll get into the blur element of all this, because I think this is another fun debate where Gavin and I have maybe slightly different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because supply and demand, of course, right? That's at the core of this. But like, what is the psychology causing people who were holding to sell?
I have one thought on this. My only thought is, I think one leads the other. And I think you're right. I think that's a huge part of it. But I think that without even knowing it, people, if this demand was still there, if people were still in the demand, those assets would be valuable still, or they would see a value. And because the demand isn't there, because there's not enough people there who see the demand, that's when people start questioning this, right? When the price starts to go down. They never freaking questioned this at 130 ETH. Nobody questioned the fact, like, why is my ape worth 155 ETH? Why is this worth $600,000 for this picture of JPEG? Nobody questioned that.
Well, actually, a lot of people question. The entire rest of the world questioned.
I'm just saying, the people who held, because that's what's happening now. This is where the ape capitulation has happened. And I think that this is what's happening, is all these people are saying, oh shit, I might end up with nothing with this. I have to like at least get my $80,000 out. Like that's where I think things are like changing.
Well, but I guess this is my point is like, let's say the other side mint hadn't happened. You honestly think apes wouldn't be dumping right now? Of course they would, right? Like it's not as if the somehow that would fundamentally change the psychological desire to hold or sell to me. So that's where I think it's a little bit...
I just think it was the start of the oversupply era. And I think, by the way, again, Yuga minted a bunch of ETH on that. It funded them for a significant way, or maybe they minted it all in Ape, which then helped Ape out quite a bit. But I don't think that's why we're where we are. I just think that's the beginning of the end of the Ponzi-nomics cycle, which is like make more NFT for the holders to get, because I think ultimately that's a failing model, essentially.
Would you think we had an oversupply model without other side?
I think so. I mean, the basic idea of what NFTs I think right now is, but I think what Zen's talking to is this idea that Ponzi-nomics model creates oversupply for every collection. And I just don't see a world where any collection that continually puts out new stuff has a value that goes up at this point, because with the amount of participants in the space. Now, if there's a bunch more people that come into the space, which, you know, everybody has a dream and a wish for, but we don't know how that's going to happen, maybe. But I don't see how that model works from this point on. And I think Luca said this in Pudgy's, like, I honestly think that the smart people now, the smart founders are understanding they have to take the supply they have and either shrink it or find a way to make what they have valuable in some other way.
Right. So I think this is where our disagreement from last week was, Gavin, was like, I felt like you were starting with supply and demand as the problem, and I was starting with nobody wants these things, and that's why there's too much supply or not enough demand. You know what? Like I feel like it starts with these things aren't useful, and nobody cares that much about gaming, and that's the starting point. And then what the follow on is that there's no demand for these things, and so then there's oversupply. But it doesn't start oversupply and lack of demand is a follow on from what to me is the real problem. It isn't itself the problem.
Sure.
I understand why it's tricky. But anyway.
Well, to me the true problem is demand, right? I think the true problem is demand. How many people are in the space? I think that's the ultimate issue. Sorry, Zen, go ahead.
No, I mean, there's a story I've told, I'm sure, on this show before. In June 2021, I still have this DM. The Cool Cats account DMs me. And I guess I was posting threads and they were like, hey, we wanted to share our project with you. Are you interested in minting or something like that? And I said, I'm honored, but you know what? I don't know if the market can handle another 10K PFP project. This is June 2021. And like in my daily floor price updates, I was talking a lot about how the supply is huge. This cannot go on forever. It just keeps getting bigger. And like, so we already, and I think a lot of people in the space already were going, how many more 10K projects can we really sustain? So supply just went absolutely bonkers from there, but there was the demand. It wasn't enough to support, you know, long-term holding of 10K project after 10K project, but it was enough for people to speculate on. And like, there's this hot potato game going on with NFTs where if you have one NFT worth a lot, you feel more comfortable investing more of your liquid ETH into other ones because you're like, well, you know, this one's worth 20 ETH. I can spend half an ETH on this because I got 20 ETH over here. In reality, though, it all comes crumbling down at some point, and that's kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, let's talk about some specific projects here. We talked about Azuki a lot last week, but we haven't really talked about the follow-on since the Azuki mint happened. The team went on a Twitter, or I guess it wasn't a Twitter Spaces, it was Discord Spaces. I was listening to it on Twitter, I think through Farouk or through Rug Radio. Yeah. They were like broadcasting it onto a Twitter space. But it was interesting to watch prices during that. You had prices initially start dropping somewhat precipitously during that space, and then you had folks, I guess whales, I think Spirit DAO was involved, like starting to really buy them up again. So you had this like fall to like 80, you had this pop back up to 9, and then since then it's been a pretty steady decline back down. You're at 7, I think, over the weekend, or over the holiday it was like 6 ETH. Yeah, it got like it got like right below 6, I think, which is crazy. How are you guys feeling on it right now? What's your take?
Yeah, I think I said this last week, where so much depends on the team's ability to respond and recover. And I think that call, it didn't instill the confidence that the community was hoping for. I think the community wanted to know that the team had a plan, a vision, that this was, you know, that they weren't scrambling. And I think what we realized was they are scrambling. They're coming up with this, that the proposal was to have a community vote and change the backgrounds. And, you know, a lot of the people in the community didn't like that. And so yeah, it wasn't the bullish Spaces or Discord call that people were looking for. And so prices dropped crazy. Like, I think the underlying thing, though, the art is still objectively good, and there are people that like it. And the community has, once again, sort of rallied around the garden, the Azuki community. And I think we've seen like a little bit of an uptick. Actually, it was a pretty large uptick in the course of like 48 hours. It went up like 50, 60, 70%. The Elementals and even the Azuki main collection. TBD where we go from here.
Zeneca and I had this question, Gavin, and maybe you know the answer. I was trying to look it up before this. What is the status of the background change? They were going to have this vote, but I don't think that's happened yet. I have to say, the new backgrounds do look sick. Like, they look cool with them.
Oh, so from what I've learned, and I know a couple people in Spirit DAO, I think there's been a lot of conversations around it. I think there's some disagreement as to like whether or not they should change it. I think this is the big thing. I think to Zen's point, like, I think a lot of people love the Elementals art. I think the fundamental problem with the Elementals drop, and this is the thing I think they really screwed up and fucked up pretty badly, is that it looks too much like
so
the
identical,
original
of
thing.
course.
And that is a bummer because what they created, and Steamboy, by the way, you can tell is an incredible artist. Like, that guy is making really good work. And I grabbed a bean in that last run up, like before it kind of peaked, and I revealed one was a floor, but like, it's really nice, right? Like, it's a really good PFP. And I just think that this is another one of those scenarios where a team, and you can tell by that Discord chat, this team needs advice. Every one of these teams feels like they need advice. Anybody in this space, and it's so funny we talk about this, but like, I feel like there would be like 30 people I know who have had seen that art, could have told them, hey, this is interesting, but like, this looks just like Azuki 1. Why are you doing this? And what it seemed like in that conversations, they didn't have a reason, and that's the messed up
yes,
thing, right?
Exactly.
Like, that's the thing that feels so screwed up.
You know, it's funny because I've been thinking about, they obviously make the comparisons of Elementals to mutant apes. And right. It's not like, as far as I know, there was a logic to mutant apes in terms of continuing some broader story that they were building within the ape universe, but it that wasn't the point of it. They had the serum thing, which was new. Like, it was a different stage of the NFT market where they were this really cool project, and then they did this serum thing. You drink the serum and you mutate, and it had that gritty feel of apes. So while it didn't feel like it tied into a bigger, like, predefined narrative or story, it still felt like it fit the ethos of apes and that it was gritty, and they were like, that was a new mechanic. That whole serum concept felt fresh at the time. So there was a freshness to that. And I've been thinking about that because I was like, my big feeling has been like, there was no plan, like there was no why behind this art. Like, that just seems so strange to me. And I realized I just had this assumption that whatever was going to be revealed as part of this was tied into a story. And I was like, well, why did I feel that way? Because it wasn't like mutants were tied into a story. But I think it's the way that the space has evolved. It's the way they've been teasing the garden, halloumi. Right. Like, they've been dripping these things, and they hadn't done anything concrete for so long, that I just assumed that like they were dropping something that was tied into lore. So that was for me just like, it
kind of is if you look at that anime teaser they dropped. Like, and
that's
this is what's
they're
so
doing
weird to me.
These films, they're doing
these
mini films.
And by the way, again, I've said this, but I believe that like some project, and really it should be Azuki because it has the money, should just self fund an anime, and even if it's a short, like,
which I think they're doing
series. Yeah, they're shorts. Now I don't know what that means to them. It could be these are shorts that are 2-minute shorts, right? And it's expensive to fund anime, but this company now has $100 million essentially. They took $50 million from investment, and they just raised 40 more, so they have the money to do something like that. But in my mind, this is the fundamental problem here, is that we're running into a scenario where, like you said, Carly, this team, you think the team that has a plan, poof, doesn't have a plan. And you're like, what in the fuck is going on? Why is this
what
happening?
Have you been doing? What have you been doing?
Yes.
That's, I think, the thing for me is like, quite literally, what have you been doing for behind the scenes? And look, like, I've said, like, that team is more of a black box to me than pretty much any of the other big projects in the space. So I feel like I have a personal relationship with many of these others. But I've talked to that team, one person in particular who's very sharp. Like, I know these, like, so I know they have been doing something. You know what I mean? This is where I don't want to just like dunk. Like, clearly there's been stuff going on, and everything is harder. Yeah, and they do amazing events, and that's true.
The event was, from everybody who went, said it was amazing, right? And
yes.
and by the way, like, Zagabond knows the check your wallets moment. But what I think, to your point, it felt like Mutant Apes dropped, but worse because it didn't feel fresh. And then when the reveal happened, now Zen, you were there for the Mutant Apes reveal. I didn't hold apes. I haven't never held apes, but I didn't hold apes at that time. I know there was a lot of FUD on how weird the Mutant Apes art looked, and it's kind of had a lot of like scenarios of it. But it looks at least different, right? The thing that people have said again and again is like, what if these had been all the animals? Because some of them are animals, or what if they had been Demon Azuki or something like that, right? Like, there's some way to differentiate it, and I think that. Plus the no plan thing just dropped. It's funny. I mean, we've talked about this. The number 2 project that was conceivably in our top 10 list going to hit number 1 if it succeeded, and Topple Yuga just completely collapsed. In fact, a little spoiler: they dropped down like 5 spots in our top 10 list, which is going to come out this week. Which I'm sure people are mad, but also like. They should. But
interestingly, the top 4 projects, which I won't give away what they are, but the top 4 were like within like 0.14 points of each other. Like literally, there was a straight up tie, and then the number 1 and number 2 were like a fraction of a point behind each other. So that's it was kind of fun to see the council's votes on that. I feel for the Azuki team. I think they're smart people. We're still a little bit in a wait and see period because we're going to see how the elemental art change. We'll see what they come out with from here in terms of the anime. Like, there's so many people who still want to root for them, I think. I also want to talk about Captainz because, of course, Ray, we talked last week, had come out with that awesome, I felt like was a really awesome Twitter post defending founders in general, not just Azuki, but it was certainly a defense of Azuki being like, just really articulately laying out and painting a picture of how hard it is to be a project founder because exactly what you've talked about before, Zeneca, and that we talked about last week, there's just
impossible expectations.
It's just that, like, and that's so true. And it was funny because he even said, like, hey, I'm writing this post before we come out with our project so that this doesn't seem self-serving. You know, I'm basically writing this while Captainz is still on top and Memeland is still on top. Yeah. And then, of course, the Captainz reveal happened, and by no means was it was the fallout Azuki level fallout, but people were very mixed reactions to negative. Yeah, I don't feel. I actually would defend this move, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts first. So let's move to Captainz here. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I mean, Captainz has been, they minted like back in January these Captainz NFTs, unrevealed or pre-reveal, and they were like these babies.
It's like floating babies with diapers.
Yeah, babies with pacifiers and diapers, and so it's like a 6-month long reveal up until the reveal. And they did some fun things along the way, like on the website, turn them into like memes and things like that, as you would expect out of Memeland. And so they revealed about a week ago, a few days after the Azuki thing. And basically they just revealed base models. So no traits, no fancy hairstyles, swords, fun colors, shirts, anything like that. And a lot of people had like the exact same PFP because of the fact that these are just base models. Now, their plan is to release like a trait store where you can go in and effectively like customize and create your own PFP, which I think is really cool. It's a model that has been done before, and so they're not the first to do it, but I mean, I imagine they will execute on a very high level when they do it. It's a cool idea. But like, just I think the expectations were not just getting the same type of thing as a bunch of other people. And I saw a really good take on Twitter, I think, where I think they should have launched with just a randomized assortment of traits, and you can still allow people to customize later on. But like at least then the people will be like, oh, that's cool, and that works well with that, and oh, I want that trait. But even that has problems because then what if you get a rare one and then you trade and then someone else turns into that? So it's again his exact Twitter thread was perfect, and I think that he saw what happened with Azuki, and then he knew exactly what they were launching, and he was like, people are not going to get this or be thrilled with this, so let me put this thread out a few days ahead. He's a really brilliant guy, so I think
he's so smart.
Well planned.
Yeah, I think there's 2 categories here of frustrations, and you have the concept, right, which was this concept of customizing your PFP, and Ray had specifically said like he wanted to deliver something that people wanted to own, not sell, which I think makes sense and is probably what the future of the space looks like. But of course, in the current space, which is people want to make money, that's not what they want. They want a thing that they can sell. They don't want this customized thing that nobody else is going to want to buy. They don't want it to really reflect their identity. They really want an asset that they're going to be able to flip later. So problem one And again, I actually don't mind that, and we can talk about that in a second, but like that was the first thing people were frustrated by, was just the concept of it. And then part two was even the art itself. And yes, it was very simple, but I think people also just felt like they were comparing it, and this was extreme in my opinion, they were comparing it to the Azarbala drop, which I think we actually referenced last week too, which I'm like, come on, this is not that bad at all. But people felt like, oh, you said this was gonna be like manga level, like whatever, like this is not good enough. So there was sort of the two dimensions there. One, feeling like what was revealed was kind of like not super high quality art, and then two was just conceptually what they did. Gavin, what did you think of this?
So, okay, I think one thing, just to point that out, like I do think it's weird because he had been teasing this was this incredible anime artist that was going to be part of this. And I think the bummer is even the base models didn't look amazing, right? Like I think that's one thing to be said. I also think that the trickiest thing for traders when they hear this exact thing, when they hear customizable PFPs, there are almost, I can't even think of any right now, but I'm sure there are a couple, but there are very few projects that have ever worked, meaning gone up in value with these, because the truth of the matter is when you can set your own rarities, it really makes things screwed up in terms of like trying to understand like what's valuable or what's not. And that's still what the space works on. Like they want to, the whales want to buy the rarest item they can possibly get. And if everything is rare, nothing is rare, right? And I think this is one of the trickiest things. Now, I actually think what Ray's doing here is a way to possibly expand the space out of this Ponzi-nomics scenario, because I do think the idea of purchasable traits is a really interesting thing, because then what you're getting at is a world that is much more like CSGO or much more like this, where you can like imagine that there's a crown that's going to cost 100,000 meme, and meme is whatever, $1. You put, if that character has that crown, you know that guy is loaded, he's social signaling, he's doing all that stuff. There's a real market here for that thing. And if that's what Ray is going at, which I think he is, it's pretty brilliant. Yes. I think this is a brilliant world.
Well, and he specifically said, and this resonated to me, he was like, I think about, and I'll probably butcher this, but I'm paraphrasing, like, I think about, like, will, in the future, you know, once an innovation has come into play, will the world ever go back to being without that innovation? It was sort of what he was getting at. And in this context, what he was saying is like, basically he feels that one day all PFPs will be customizable because everybody will want it to really reflect their identity. And so if that's where he thinks inevitably this stuff is going, he's going to go there first. I think he's probably right. I mean, you know, there's like the being too early is the same as being wrong thing. And the truth is we're still deeply in an era where it's all about financial activity and about trading and flipping and all of that. Do I think the long tail of NFTs are much less about that? Yes. And so the question is, and I think the answer is yes, but can they survive long enough to get to the point where that is really what NFTs are about? Because we're not really there yet.
And I was going to say, I think the other question is the promise of the metaverse. And I know this sounds like it's almost like a bad word now, but the promise of the metaverse was always you can take your stuff and bring it from place to place, right? There is a world where in the NFT metaverse, let's call it, before we get to people playing somewhere, imagine a world where your traits could go from NFT to NFT. And there's some sort of world where like tradable traits could be like, again, this crown. What if there was like the meme land crown, but it could be worn by other NFTs? Like, I don't know, there's something interesting about that idea. Yeah. It also gets to that 6551 idea about about an NFT being a wallet. So I'm really curious to know if Ray is going to use that protocol as part of this Captainz drop, because that would be an interesting way to kind of like make the traits tradable. And I think that could, I mean, again, I don't want to, I think Ray, I think the disappointment was I had no, by the way, I'm a Captainz holder. I had no idea this was happening right when it did. Like it was a shock. I was like, wait a second. And I was like, oh no. And two, I think it just happened in a way that was in a really down market. It's always was going to be a hard narrative to sell because people hate this idea, but I think it's ultimately could be great.
I am so excited to announce that this year, Overpriced JPEGs has partnered with OpenSea, the world's leading NFT marketplace, built for everyone, creators, collectors, noobs, and experts alike. I'm an OpenSea user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the ecosystem, supporting 8 chains and 8 global languages. I trust the systems they've put in place to keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection and removal, robust verification, and more. It's why they are the place to buy, sell, and create NFTs. That's right. You know OpenSea, you use OpenSea, but did you know that OpenSea now has drops? New exclusive projects launch every week from top projects and creators, and you can check them out now using the link in the show notes. They also recently introduced self-serve drops, which is in beta, and allows creators to launch their projects right on OpenSea. This drops product gives creators access to tools like rich storytelling drop pages, multi-chain support, and drop mechanic customization. The full launch for self-serve drops is coming this spring. So check out the upcoming drops on OpenSea right now using the link in the show notes and own what moves you. You'll also be supporting the show in the process. Let me introduce you to a brand new company that I could not be more excited about, Web3 Sense. A Web3 analytics platform that combines on-chain data with social media insights to give you the deepest, most meaningful intelligence into any NFT community. I have tested other analytics platforms out there, but Web3 Sense has the most comprehensive capabilities I've seen in the NFT ecosystem. They apply sophisticated data science to wallet histories to determine behavioral patterns and help shape predictive analytics. In other words, they can tell you which Twitter accounts are actually the influencers in your space. And they can tell you what resonates most within a community by looking at what other communities token holders are involved in. The number of use cases here is virtually unlimited. So whether you're a trader, creator, institution, brand, agency, I promise Web3 Sense has data that you want to see with the deep and actionable insights that you need to build, analyze, grow, start, whatever you want to do within the NFT space and in terms of building a business and a community. Now, they are still in very early days, so they're eager to connect with the community. So if you're interested in learning more about what Web3 Sense can do for you and your business, and you should be, go and fill out the very short form linked to in the show notes, and someone from their team will reach out with more information and an opportunity for a product demo. Trust me, you won't regret it. Okay, let's move on. Let's do this Blur debate, and then we might circle back to talk about some specific projects. I want to touch base with Pudgy's and talk a little bit about Boss Beauties because we haven't talked about that in a while, but they're doing some fun stuff as well. Okay, there's this ongoing conversation around what level of culpability Blur has in the decline of the NFT market. Pac-Man, who does not usually comment on the drama, did come out with a thread really essentially defending Blur and being like, some prices have fallen since we've launched, some prices have gone up, but like, let's be clear, we injected all the liquidity. Like, one of the times prices went up was when we airdropped y'all a shit ton of money in the form of Blur tokens and like spurred an entire little mini bull market within this bear market. Gavin, I know you're staunchly on Pac-Man's side, I believe, in this.
Okay, I'm gonna set up this to be clear. I think the heart of my argument here comes to what we talked about in the beginning of the show, is that it is not the fault of the tool, it is the fault of the tool's users. And when I say that, I mean the blame lies purely in two parts. One, the people who have left because the market is so much smaller. And two, it's the people who are using the tool in the way that I think is bad for their behavior. Now, granted, it's if you provide a gun to people and they start shooting people, you have to be aware that that tool might be bad. I don't think that in this instance, to me, the heart of my argument is Blur as a product is an amazing product. There's a market for it. People love it. People like it. It is not the reason the NFT market has collapsed. The reason the NFT market has collapsed is because people have left. And as Zeneca said before, supply and demand have completely outstripped one another. And I think that's what I think. This to me feels like a bunch of crybabies in some ways, trying to find a reason why their bags are down. And I understand there's definite arguments for the gaming of the system, for providing people tokens for trading. My only thing, and I said this to Carly, my only thing about this is, did Blur launch in a bear market, and was that a smart move in terms of when they launched? I think a project has to launch when a project launches, especially something that's trying to be a competitor to a whale like OpenSea. So that's the only thing I would criticize about the project, is like, it's not a great time to launch a project like that because it's this market that's so fewer participants. But in general, I believe that it's not Blur's fault that NFTs are down at all.
Zeneca, your case, and then I will make mine.
I feel like anytime Blur comes up, I have to disclose I was a seed investor in Blur. I advised the company in a capacity in 2022, and I have a role as a director of the Blur Foundation, which is, there's not too much happening there right now, but in the future I might be more involved. So I've seen Blur since day one, basically. Before it was even called Blur, Order Book was the name.
Wait, what was it called? What was it called?
Order Book.
Order Book.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
He's got
I'm
that
glad they changed
Aussie
it to
accent,
Blur.
Gavin.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll translate for you.
I'm pretty sure it was always just like a placeholder name until they came up
That's
with
fine.
the public name. So yeah, it is clearly an excellent product. People like it. It is great that there's competition for OpenSea. No one likes monopolies. Competition breeds better products and better user experiences. I lean much more towards agreeing with you, Gavin. I don't think Blur caused the market collapse. I don't think, like, it is supply and demand at the end of the day. If there, it might have added fuel to it. And by that, I mean, if there was demand, the highs would be higher. But because there isn't, it might have sped up the
Yes.
floor price. And even that is, I think, up for debate. Like, there was injection of liquidity because I think the one thing that, the one point that has credence is the incentive structure and the incentivization of bidding, Blur points, listing, all that kind of stuff. Because it introduces a slightly less organic element into the nature of the buyers and sellers and traders. Now, again, I don't think that if Blur didn't exist, NFTs would be doing great. NFTs would still be collapsed and doing terribly in price. And I agree. I personally think that a lot of people are placing undue blame on Blur or other things as well. People are blaming. People are just quick to blame and rightly emotional when prices are down and their bags are down bad. So yeah, I think I'm not as strongly in agreement as you, Gavin, but I'm like 80% of the way there.
Okay. So
Let's get it out of here. Bring it on.
No, I don't actually totally disagree. Obviously, the fundamental problem is that nobody wants these JPEGs. Like that is the issue. But when you say Blur did not cause them to go down, quite literally what the incentive system does is make people list lower than they would, list below floor because they think that they can make that up with Blur points. You suddenly now have somewhere between an incentive or a justification for losing money on an NFT because you can make that up with Blur points. And I just think there's no way logically to look at this situation and not think that there are some people a number of people, in fact, the majority of people who are super active on Blur, who haven't been listing lower than they would have otherwise, knowing that they could make up for that loss with Blur points. Like that is just literally what a system like this does. And so from that standpoint, that has driven things lower and lower and lower. And you quite literally can see, and this is obviously all the work of Sam, who I respect, talking about this NFT stats, that people who are holders, who are not just like flipper day traders or who love these projects, have over time been selling to people who are just farmers who are going to do this exact thing of like selling lower and lower and lower and driving the price lower. Now, again, the core problem is people want to sell to begin with because there's not demand for this space, but Blur has driven these prices lower in this way. I think that the question here, right, is like, pick your poison. Would you rather prices dumping precipitously, or would you rather prices not falling because there's no liquidity? Like the world without Blur is prices actually might not be falling as much, I think, but there's nobody buying. So it's just people just aren't even listing assets that they would like to be selling. And so that's where it's a little bit tricky. Like I actually don't even think a world with Blur is necessarily worse, but I think to argue that they have not contributed to this slide down and this is not true. And I understand why people are frustrated by that.
Would you, if the demand was significantly higher, say Blur launched in 2021, do you think that they would drive price up because of the volume? Like, this is what I'm trying to get at, is I think that there's a world where literally the idea right now is, because the Blur point system is like people bidding as close to or below the floor so they can get the points without getting liquidated or without getting filled, right? So that they don't get the actual NFT. That's all based on where the floor is. Now, yes, you're right. In a world of low demand, the price goes down because what it's doing is trending over time further down because nobody's buying that and that brings the price down. But in a world of high demand, those bid fills or whatever you want to, there's a name for them, the people putting money into the pool, it goes up because I've seen it go up, right? So like it depends on the project. Oh, by the way, the one thing I will say that I think Blur did screw up, and I don't know, and they're trying to fix it now with trait bidding. I think they screwed the idea of mid rares, which is if you're not familiar, a mid rare is a really cool looking non-floor, but isn't the most rare. And I think that kind of flattened the idea. So there's just rares and just floors, which sucks.
Let me cut in and just say, this is, again, I think you have two categories here. It's like what I said with the Azuki or with the Captainz thing as well. I think people are mad on two different levels. You have the financial side, which is, are they causing this slide in prices, or are they causing the market to collapse financially? Which no, again, I think actually the two cases we're looking at is just like a no liquidity world, so prices are maintained, but you have no buyers, or a sliding scale downward. So there's people who are mad on the financial side, and then there's people mad on the cultural side who feel like they financialized NFTs and stripped away the culture of people loving the art, loving the creativity, trading because they wanted these things. Yeah. And I think that's kind of silly too. Like, I tend to be just like, things are inevitable, right? Markets are inevitable. If there's a way to make money, people are going to go do it. Yes, we can cry over a certain culture that's been lost, and it's, the mid-rare stuff, but it is what it is. Like, I'm not going to blame these guys for launching a product that people wanted to use, and the fact that had consequences.
That's my take. I mean, listen, I think the NFTs are fucked in that way personally, because I love that aspect of NFTs, and nobody can figure out how to get that back. And I think to me, and Blur is not it is to blame in this way too, in part with a lot of other people. I believe that turning point was royalties. And I believe that royalties were in part what made NFTs special. And the minute that those went away, and that is a trader culture thing, because the people that were pushing for that were decentralization people, which I get, but really the traders who were like, I shouldn't have to pay a royalty to an artist on this thing that I see as a fungible token, essentially, that I'm just doing. And that's a bummer. And I think that really screwed up a lot of stuff in this space. But again, the thing I always think what was the name of that project with the people that had the really long necks? Zeneca, do you remember that? Do you remember the one?
It's Nyla Hayes. Isn't it the long neck?
No, not that one. Not that one. There was a PFP of these people and they had these really long necks, and they were like kind of cartoony, almost like looked a little doodlesy. Does that sound familiar to you at all? No, anyway, this was a project that was in early 2022, I think. And I knew all these kind of mainstream normie people that liked it, and they were in it. They were in the Discord, and they were participating.
Sorry.
No, not Creeps.
No.
It was, somebody will DM me at me and they'll tell me what it is, but I'm sure it's still active. I'm not saying it's not active, but that's the kind of project that felt like the heart of NFT community thing, right? It was like this art that was kind of like goofy and fun, a project, someone had coalesced around it. The trader culture that exists now, and again, Blur helped create it. I'm not saying that Blur didn't help create the trader culture. That's the thing that I get bummed about. Like, those projects aren't coming out and feeling like they're launching now. It's really just like, it's all money talk. It's all money talk. And that's where I feel like NFTs kind of went wrong. And again, Blur had a part of that conversation. So I think that's something to be aware of.
I want to get back to the question you asked, which is if the demand was there and the markets were going up, would Blur be having the opposite effect? Because again, I want to ask a question, which is, in the Blur points system, I know you get points for putting bids up, whether or not you win a bid or not, whether or not you acquire. Do you get more points if your bid is accepted?
No, you get more points if your bid is as close to the floor as possible. That's what happens. So actually, I shouldn't say this. Zen, you may know that. I don't think you get points if your bid is accepted. What you get is, the longer your bid is up there, you get a stream of points. And as close as the floor you are as possible, you get those points. So there's an incentive to keep the bid as absolutely as close, razor close to the floor as possible. So that's why I'm arguing, if the floors go up, the bids go up. And I've seen it happen. Like, you can see the whole bid pool move up along with it.
Well, and initially that is what happened. Like, to be clear, initially...
Yeah, it was a boost because everybody had
It was a boost and people had more money, and also it was staying around there. I think that my point just being that for the first time you can justify listing lower than you maybe otherwise would have, because you're getting to make up that with points.
Sure.
And,
I get it. Yeah, that makes sense.
And you're talking about supply and demand, right? Things are being dumped into the hands of people who are going to consistently list them as supply. Like, you have people who are going to come to, like the OSF Mando example, right? Would they have dumped 72 apes without Blur, like, no, I strongly think they would not have. You know, and they.
But I guess my question is it a bad thing that they did it? And I would think this is a question of like, what is it bad for? Or who's it bad for? Right?
Well,
it's definitely not bad for OSF and Mando. That's a great thing for them. They pulled out $10 million, you know, and that was a great move for them.
Well, this goes exactly back to the two scenarios that I painted before, right? Because I think what happens without Blur is OSF and Mando sell off some number of their apes. I think they still hold probably a bunch of them and just don't list them because they don't want to list them at these crazy losses, or because they're just literally, or they're listing them but there's no buyers for them, you know? And so you have the scenario where the floor isn't necessarily dropping as precipitously, but you have a bunch of people sitting on assets that they maybe don't really want to be sitting on, but you wouldn't have had 72 apes then put into the hands of somebody who's definitely going to sell them and frankly start selling them lower and lower for the sake of being able to get points. You know what I mean? So I think that's the dynamic. I'm not anti-Blur. I think, again, I believe in the inevitability of things, and they provided a market service that a number of people wanted and have used. And so I'm not going to sit here and even say that I wish that we lived in a world without Blur, but I also think they have absolutely contributed to floor prices declining through creating market manipulations, right? This is an unnatural market they've created.
Okay, I want to say two things. It's actually going back a couple steps. One was on the idea of like lack of liquidity when before in the before times before Blur, when you know
BB.
Yeah, I think you can actually see that play out in real time in comparison, because if you look at art blocks which are not on Blur and a lot of those collections, sometimes there'll literally be 0 listed, and it's kind of like there's fake floors. So like the one might be listed at 4 ETH, but then the next sale is 0.3 ETH. And so like people are accepting, and people who have them, they might not list them because they don't think they're going to sell. They don't want to go through the hassle of paying and signing a transaction and all that. So I think that Blur helped with the price discovery, and I think what has happened is that prices are lower than people like. It's nicer for people to right. If the floor is 4 ETH and you're holding one, but you can only get half an ETH for it, it doesn't feel good to list it at.
No, exactly.
10th of floor. So you're going to list closer to 4 ETH, but no one's going to buy it. And just the difficulty to mass list and mass buy, I think, is one of the big differentiating factors. And so because Blur makes it so easy to sell and list and buy and find that price point, and they're incentivizing bids to, you know, get as close to floor and all that kind of stuff, we've just found the true value of these things quicker than we might otherwise have.
I mean, the funny thing is, my pushback there would be, again, they're manipulating things. So, like, it's hard to say you're really finding price discovery in a market that's being incentivized and manipulated. Like, I would almost say, the true thing is that, like, they may be propping up prices from that standpoint, right? Like, the true price may be 0.
Which is even more scary, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, totally. But would you rather live in naivete? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think both
again,
are
there's
bad.
no liquidity
Both
and the price
ideal.
is nothing.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And that's
I mean,
why,
this
again,
feels
that's
like,
why.
Yeah, so I was gonna say it feels like this is at least open market, and you can see what's going on. And I think to your point, Carly, there is market manipulation, quote unquote. It's not. I wouldn't call it manipulation. I would say incentivized.
I don't mean
market.
that as cynically as it sounds, but like we're not getting the true clearing prices of these things because like people are incentivized to bid close to the floor. And
well, and
so
I think what
they
you
may
see
not
is
even
price...
want the asset at that price. I mean, you know, Maki Big Brother is like holding didn't he tweet recently, like, I'm not the market maker, I am the market, you know, which like is actually just true.
I don't know what, honestly, Maki,
market.
I don't know. The one thing I will say, a friend of mine pointed this out, is that Maki bought all these Azukis and then laddered them, which is like a big step for Maki. Like, he's not a ladder guy, but like, that is a big thing, right? So the thing I was going to say is the Blur token is down. I don't know what it is right now, but it was quite down for a while. It had a little spike when it got listed on a Korean exchange, but it's down. I honestly think that like the big question is going to be, and by the way, they just extended season 2, right? Which is just the way it is. I think that the heart of this whole thing is, to me, there are people that are going to want to trade in this way. I think that it is. I think, Carly, I'm not saying that it caused no decline. Like, I don't think Blur. I think it participated in somewhat, but to Zeneca's point, you don't want to see what your assets are really worth. And I think this is where everybody's anger is coming at. It's like somebody like looked in the mirror and they don't like the way they look, and so they turn to their partner and they're like, why do I look this way? Like, that's what it feels like. Do you know what I mean? Like, it feels like there's a little bit of like, I'm gonna want to blame somebody for the reason that I put $200,000 in this market and now it's potentially worth 25. Like, that's a big difference.
Let me paint one hypothetical scenario. I don't think this is necessarily how it would have actually played out, and it's a counterfactual. But in a world without Blur, the picture I'm painting is in a world without Blur, you just have no liquidity, right? So what you have is apes have a 60 ETH floor, but nobody's buying them. But you at least feel like your ape is worth 60 ETH a little bit. If you really dig hard enough and you're honest with yourself, you know that's not true. But you look at that number and you feel okay. And this gets to a point you made earlier, Zeneca, which is when things were going up, you would buy this thing for half an ETH because you were going, oh, I have 20 ETH over here. Now that was money on paper that if you weren't selling it, you didn't actually have, but that still fed a belief in wealth that could feed little bits of the market. And I'm curious, like in a world without Blur, if just seeing floor prices, I think floor prices would be higher in a world without Blur. There would be no liquidity, so it would be fake in ways, but the prices would be higher. And would that in some ways still fuel a little, like, could that have spurred then a comeback of some level of activity because people felt wealthier than they were?
My argument for that would be is that I believe, and Zen, sorry, I didn't mean to jump right in, but like I think that floor prices might be higher, but I think they would be like 35 to 37 versus 30, not 60 versus 30, because there's no way the market is that far off. Like I just really don't believe there's so much. When you think about Yuga particularly, right? This is what we're all talking about is the kind of champion project that has kind of like fallen from grace in terms of price. I don't want to say like obviously apes are doing a lot and they're playing a lot, but I don't think there would be a 30 ETH difference because I think the market even without Blur would find the balance, right? And I just don't see a world where it's that big a thing. There's no way Blur has caused a 50% drop in prices. There's just no way in my mind. Now,
I mean, you have all these people dumping into flippers. You have a bunch of people dumping into flippers.
By the way,
who
people
are quite
did that
literally
before, though.
willing to list.
People dumped and flipped all the
otherwise.
time on OpenSea. I mean, I know what's his name? Nate.
I'm sorry, you're right. You're not dumping
into
into flippers. You're dumping into airdrop farmers who want to
that's the difference.
Flood supply and list lower than they would otherwise because they want the points. Now, you're right. Do I think it'd be 60-30? No. But I think 35-30 might be too narrow a gap. Like, and this is where it's a counterfactual, who the hell knows? And I don't even think that the scenario I just laid out is necessarily what would have happened. I'm just trying to I do think that people who are frustrated with Blur on this angle have more credence than I think you've given them, Gavin, in our text debates, and that's why we're having a fun fight now.
I will say, look, everybody's mad about this, and I understand it, and I get why. I understand why. Like, there's an incentivization to churn, right? This is the big thing, the incentivization to churn. And I think the churn is not healthy for the market in terms of what we all like about it. The question I have, and this is where, and by the way, this is where my English major background really screws me up in some ways, is that like, there is a whole history of financial markets, of financialized assets that I've heard from many people that like this is something that exists in them, all of this world exists, and that is how financial markets work. And this is where we get to the heart of the problem with NFTs right now, is that you've got a financial asset plus an art asset, and you've got these weird things coming together. And right now we're just treating them more like financial assets. I think that's the issue here, and I don't know how that gets fixed, but I will say I don't think it's Blur's fault that they're treating them like financial assets. Like, I think have there not been incentivized structures like this in other formats as well before? Like, that's the only question I have.
I want to jump back to the mid-res thing just real quick, because a lot of people say that Blur killed mid-res, but I actually saw this yesterday. Deez had a tweet in June 2022, I think it was June 2022, when we were going through a pretty big bear market. This is when Goblin Town launched and we were in that depressed state. And basically he was saying, no one cares about your mid-res now. Like, you either buy floor or you buy grails. And I think that's something that even I had said previously, and a lot of people have said, where in a bull market, yes, people will pay for mid-res, but in a bear, it's like, it's the grails and it's the floors that really move. And so that had already started happening before Blur. And just wanted to mention that. Yeah,
again, I don't think Blur's the enemy here. In the sense that the big problem is that people don't want NFTs and the supply and demand and everything we've been talking about for this whole episode. So I don't want to confuse that. But I do want to express that there is a very real dynamic that Blur has created in which you do have this like slow declining slope because you're dealing with a bunch of people who are buying these assets solely so that they can get blur points, essentially. And so they're willing to list lower than they would have otherwise because they feel like they can make up that difference with blur points. To your point, Gavin, about the normal financial world, and maybe I'll sound like an idiot talking about this, but I'm reading the book Barbarians at the Gate, which is about the leverage buyout of RBR Nabisco, and it's really good. It's a very good book, but it's funny because one of the dynamics that got introduced, the idea of a leverage buyout, were these junk bonds, were basically these financial firms that specialized in LBOs, which are the leverage buyouts, would raise capital to acquire these companies through issuing these things called junk bonds. I don't know enough about junk bonds, and they get into it a little bit in the book, but not in too much depth. But there was this like huge debate where you had some of these like older stalwart financial guys, even guys who did LBOs, but who hated junk bonds, were like, that's fake money. Like, it's literally, you're raising fake money. This money these junk bonds are worthless, but you're using that as the capital to buy these real companies. And, there's all these like rants. There's one guy in particular talking about like the fake. And I'm like, there's nothing new under the sun. Like, now we're railing about like, this is fake money. Like, it's all like to your point, like the financial system itself obviously has so, so much is just propped up by belief, right? And now again, I probably sound like an idiot because I'm not.
No, I think that's but the heart of this is we're talking about freaking monkey JPEGs, the ultimate in propped up, right? And I mean, again, I'm a fan of NFTs, but like when you're talking about a picture of a monkey that you put value on, and now you're mad because the value is 50% lower because the thing came out, that might incentivize that, but like the value was invented in the first place, right? Like this is the heart of all this stuff. I feel like I think that's a super good point. Like there's nothing new under the sun.
So we're 57 minutes in. We have literally 7 topics left that I was planning on having us discuss today.
Can I make it real quick? This is a real quick one.
Absolutely.
I want to make 2 points after that.
Yeah. About this being nothing new under the sun, I was watching, I don't know if you've seen, Lex Friedman interviewed Mark Andreessen recently.
No, I want to watch that.
I'm like about halfway through. And there's this part, I've clipped it, I'm planning to tweet it out because it was so poignant. Basically, Mark is talking about the early days of the internet, or they're both talking about, and how like JPEGs used to load like line by line, and then they had the progressive JPEG that got blurry and you could see it, and how much of a game changer that was. And then he says about how there's a big debate in the early days of the internet about whether images belonged on the internet or not. And like the purists said, all the serious stuff is text only, and only frivolous stuff will come from adding literally JPEGs to the internet. And we're having the exact same debate again, which is really funny, where like the purists are like, no, you just clog in the network. And then there's like the rest of the world who are like, we like JPEG, we like art, we like culture, it's fun.
Yeah. Mark Andreessen, I listened to his interview both on Rogan and on Sam Harris, so I'll listen to this one. I was so disappointed by his interview on Rogan, and Rogan does this every so often where he has somebody on that I'm really excited to hear him talk to, and then he just completely hyper-focuses in on one specific area that I'm not that interested in and can't let it go for like 3 hours. And I'm like, how is this the most popular podcast in the world? I like Joe, but like it's really the strangest thing. So like he had Andreessen on, he didn't talk about crypto or anything NFTs, which of course is what I wanted to hear them talk about. And he just literally for like 2 hours is trying to get Andreessen to admit that like AI might kill us all. This was before like the big AI push. Like this was earlier than even that. And and Mark was like, I'm not that worried about it, and here's why. And Rogan could not let it go and just kept being like, this is why it's like the end of the world. It was just, and I was like, God damn it, Joe. So it sounds like Lex did a better job.
It's a great interview.
It's a great interview.
Okay.
It's a great interview.
All right, with our limited time left, let's just go through a couple stories here that I thought were interesting. You have Pudgy's entering, well, for the second time, I suppose, the high-end collectible market. When they launched their Amazon toy, they had also done like a select, I forget the website they had partnered with or the company they had partnered with. Network. That's right.
Yeah,
but without vowels or something. I think it's like one of those.
Yeah, it's Nevidwork or whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah. It's like some bizarre spelling or whatever it is. Yeah. But any case, so they had done like a drop of higher end collectibles that had sold out very quickly. They're doing a second one now. They're only going to be 150 available. I'm reading this, dropping at different times for Asia and North America. It is cool. Like I do like the way they're having this 2-pronged approach where they have this mass market side to their business, and then they have this high end side to their business.
Super smart.
I think that's super smart. I mean, the question is, can you get the supply and demand dynamics right for that high end market? And that's a very hard tightrope to walk. So we'll see how that goes. And I wanted to flag as we talk about this, Boss Beauties is doing something. They haven't given the full announcement yet, but basically they apparently have a merch line coming out with a mass market retailer, assuming like a Target, Macy's, Walmart. They've done something with one of those previously, I thought, but I could be wrong about this. But in any case, you can submit your Boss Beauty to be selected as the art used in that merchandise. And if you do, you'll get a one-time royalty payment for that. So obviously I'm a fan of that. They've done that kind of thing before where like if your art was selected to be the art in the New York Stock Exchange, you would get something for that. And they've been teasing doing this kind of thing with merchandise for a long time. So what are you laughing at?
I just had a great idea. This is another one of my dumb ideas that comes up with this podcast. Why has nobody done a stock art NFT? Or like a stock photo NFT. So what you do is you shoot a bunch of stock photos or you make stock art and you create it, and it is designed exactly so that you get weird photos that people are going to want to license. Like, this is an interesting pathway to maybe making an NFT project. You just do the licensing part first. You make the art that's going to be licensable, and you make sure. Anyway, this is.
So you're thinking just like corporate woman in the boardroom, and it's just like
kind of,
like a picture of like a woman just standing there. But are you thinking like photography? Or
my favorite stock video of all time. You probably have seen this. Is the monkey who's typing on the keyboard and then pushes it away. Have you seen this one? It's like a GIF.
Yeah.
It's incredible. There's a whole photo shoot somebody did with. No, but this is a photo shoot that somebody did with this monkey, and then it turned into a meme, right? So my thought is, you get a crew of people that are smart, and you create things that could get used in GIFs and other places, and you make that the NFT, but you go into it with the idea that we are just going to mint this, and the license is baked in, like in some form or another. So anyway.
Yeah. I met with a platform a long time ago that was specifically trying to like bring the blockchain to Shutterfly and Shutterstock, whatever these companies are, or just, it's a problem in the world of art across the board, but in photography as well. Like if you take a picture that gets used by a ton of news outlets, and they're rushing to get the story out, like they don't necessarily find you and accredit you properly. And so, having that all on the blockchain such that like payments are automatically baked in. Of course, that was back in the day when we all thought royalties were a real thing and we're going to be sustainable. But in any case, interesting. Okay, last piece of news that I have literally been trying to talk about for 4 weeks on this podcast. We keep running out of time. And I don't know if anybody who listens to this show particularly cares, but I've become much more interested in Bitcoin than I started, like everybody in this space, interested in Bitcoin back in like 2016, 2017, and then became a bit of an Ethereum maxi, and now I'm back on the Bitcoin trade a bit more, in part because of ordinals, in part because I really just have come to appreciate that they lead the space, and the broader world still thinks of Bitcoin when they think of crypto, and the institutional world is interested in it. And, for all the reasons that Bitcoin maxis would cite around max decentralization, the fact that it doesn't seem to be in the crosshairs of regulators, on and on. So I think Bitcoin is really important for anybody who's interested in anything in this space. And this ETF news is quite interesting. So it's been a roller coaster, but the latest is that it's looking like it's on track again. I don't know if folks followed this, but last week there was some headlines out, and I think a piece out by the Wall Street Journal that the SEC had serious concerns about BlackRock's filing. This was following a period of time when everyone was like, this is going to be the savior because BlackRock has filed for, 500 ETFs over time and only one has ever been rejected. So they're going to be the great white hope. I, of course, was like, there's no way the SEC is going to let a Bitcoin ETF go through. But, joke's on me because I don't get anything right on my predictions on the show. Though I had this moment of looking very prescient because, again, then there was this report that the SEC said that BlackRock's filing wasn't sufficient. But now it looks like we're back on. And this whole thing, what's so funny to me about this whole thing is the reason that the SEC has rejected, or the primary reason that they've rejected all of these filings in the past, the reason they've primarily cited is that other spot Bitcoin ETFs, which is really what we're talking about here, because there's already future Bitcoin ETFs, Bitcoin future ETFs, is that they didn't have these like surveillance sharing agreements, which is basically a way to prevent market manipulation. Basically, the SEC says whoever's going to issue or whoever's going to list an ETF on it needs to have a partnership with a Bitcoin exchange that is sufficiently big enough that if there was a market manipulation going on, that exchange would be able to flag it and recognize it and share that information with the ETF marketplace, essentially. And so that's been the holdup in the past, is that other folks who have filed for a spot Bitcoin ETF or Bitcoin spot ETF, I always forget the order of that, haven't had that. So in BlackRock's filing, they had like surveillance sharing agreement all over their filing, just really trying to hammer home the idea that they had solved this problem. But it was very strange because they hadn't listed who that surveillance sharing agreement was going to be with. So NASDAQ is the exchange that's listing the ETF, BlackRock's ETF. and they said NASDAQ was going to have the surveillance sharing agreement with a big partner, but they didn't say who that was, a big Bitcoin exchange, but they didn't say who that was. Now, everybody assumed it was Coinbase because Coinbase has worked with BlackRock in a number of ways before. Coinbase is integrated with Aladdin, which is like BlackRock's, platform for wealth management or whatever else. And but they didn't name them, which in hindsight is weird. If that's like the crux of this whole thing, you would think they would name their partner on it. So then the SEC did their whole thing about, hey, there's not enough, we have major concerns about this BlackRock filing. Okay, so this week BlackRock has now come back and officially named Coinbase as the partner in this surveillance sharing agreement. And you have some players in the space who are saying we're pretty confident this is going to go through. You have Bernstein, I don't know, some firm that was being cited as saying they think this will go through. The thing that's funny to me about this is the SEC is suing Coinbase. Like the idea that they're like, yes, well, we're sufficiently satisfied now. But I guess.
My thing is, I think if BlackRock wants something, this is how powerful BlackRock is. And I think people don't really understand, but BlackRock wants something, they're going to make it happen. And this is where I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but like there are certain companies in the world, BlackRock is one of them, that controls and has so much power that I believe if they decide they want to do something that isn't like, I don't think they're being villainous here. I think they want to push something through. They're going to find a way to get it done. And I think this is the heart of this. It's just like, they want this, it's going to happen.
Totally. And I think the reason I've been thinking about this too, there's a couple things. So first of all, yes, the SEC is suing Coinbase, but they're suing them for being an illegal securities exchange. And the SEC and Gary Gensler have already said that they don't think Bitcoin is a security.
Right.
And so whatever issues they may have with Coinbase listing Bitcoin on there is not one of them, right? Yeah. That's not the problem with Coinbase, according to the SEC, is Bitcoin is not their problem. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing is the SEC has a little bit of a problem because they've already allowed these Bitcoin futures ETFs to go through, and the futures prices are set based on the spot prices. Mm-hmm. So everybody who's kind of savvy in this and diving deep into it is being like, there's such a logical disconnect between saying we'll allow a futures ETF, but we won't allow a spot ETF when the futures ETF is based on the spot pricing. So there's like, I don't know if there's things already in courts, but the whole idea is like a court would never uphold this. And this is where I get to your point, Gavin, about BlackRock being powerful enough. The SEC can get away with a bunch of incongruous kind of bullshit hand-wavy statements when it comes to the crypto world where nobody serious is going to pay attention to them. But they can't pull the same kind of bullshit, illogical move thing when BlackRock is on the other side. Because BlackRock has the ear of everybody. BlackRock could go on CNBC all day long and get any point they want out to the mainstream. And Larry Fink is out there talking really positively about Bitcoin, which is amazing. Larry Fink being the CEO of BlackRock. So they just can't get away with the same like kind of pulling the wool over the eyes of the public. Like Gary can go out there, Gary Gensler's going out there saying all sorts of bullshit that's like not really true or half the story about crypto on CNBC. And a ton of mainstream people are just going to believe that because crypto doesn't have the voice to counter it. That's not the case. If you're doing something really illogical against BlackRock, like BlackRock can hit you back right where you're hitting them,
Yeah.
So I think
have one
that's
question about
important.
this for both of you maybe, is that let's imagine a world where crypto is cyclical, right? So let's imagine there's another up run. Does this make the next up run like insanely big? And then does it make the next up run dump insanely hard? Like this is the thing that I think is something that's interesting to think about is as crypto has grown over time, the ups and the downs do feel more extreme. Now, this is just me, again, not being an expert, but this feels like, you're going to get lots more money rushing in because if you see Bitcoin going up, lots of people are going to buy an ETF that exposes them to it. Will Bitcoin crash in the same way is the other question, right? If there's this institutional money in it, will it crash in the same sort of idea?
I have a good answer to this, and then which is, and I tend to buy into this narrative, which is that every cycle, the cryptos that are still around crash actually a little bit less hard. So like Bitcoin, Bitcoin in its first down cycle crashed like 95%. In the second down cycle, it crashed like 86%, whatever. Like this most recent cycle, Bitcoin crashed less.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Ethereum, like 70%, whatever it was, and Ethereum's followed the same pattern. And then you see it with like Solana. Like Solana's this most recent crash like 90 whatever percent, like a lot more than ETH did because it was its first really down cycle. Now, who knows if that holds for forever? But I don't know. There's a certain logic to that for me, and I don't know if it's true. I think that there may even be an argument that that's what's happened, and this wouldn't even be an argument. You'd be able to track this. It's a fact. But for other like high risk assets, like like tech stocks and things. I think people have even said that's analogous to what happened like when you like the 2000s tech crash versus like, you know, other times. So I think now in dollar terms, right? Bitcoin crashed harder this time because it fell $30,000, but in percentage terms, it's crashed less.
Right.
So I think what would happen, my guess would be it might crash harder in dollar terms, but not as much in percentage terms.
That's interesting.
Even if you have this influx of institutional capital. I don't know if you have another perspective then.
Yeah. The longer an asset survives effectively, the less risky it seems to people. Like in the early days, and even I think in the 2018 bear market, a lot of people thought, oh, this is it. It's dead. Crypto is dead.
Right.
It's just not coming back. I think we're kind of past that point now. I don't think anyone seriously thinks that crypto will just completely be eradicated from the face of the earth.
Oh, there are people out there. There are people.
Well, yeah.
Actually, again, people like,
We're not
nobody
past
was
that
telling
point.
us, nobody was saying our bags were overpriced at $150 or $150.
People
it's like, well, the
in
rest
the
of the
space,
people.
let's say that. Like people who are
Okay,
here, builders in the space, like, I think even in 2018, a lot of, again, I left, but I've spoken to a lot of people that stuck around there, and they say, like, it was just, this current bear market is nothing like that. That's when people really thought, oh, this is the end. It's over. It's not coming back. I think we're past that. I don't think we'll ever get back to that stage again. I think higher highs in terms of monetary amount, but like percentage-wise, it like stabilizes and becomes
but higher lows to...
Higher lows, it becomes a less risky asset. Still insanely risky, but just less risky.
This is actually making me think I'm not exposed to Bitcoin at all, but like it is one of those things where I should probably put some of my, not like a ton of it, but I've got a relatively small retirement account. I might as well put some of it in now because this is the time probably to do it, I assume.
I mean, it is up a lot
advice
right now. I know it is up a bunch. This is my problem too, because I was like, I want to buy more, and I'm DCAing into it. I think I said this last week. Like, in one of my infinite regrets is that I didn't keep DCAing into Bitcoin in like early 2021. I started DCAing into both ETH and Bitcoin, and at some point, I don't even remember when, I started DCAing exclusively into ETH.
Right.
And pulled my DCAs in Bitcoin, and I just re-upped my Bitcoin DCAs, and I'm like so mad at myself that I wasn't just buying Bitcoin this whole time. But it is what it is. Infinite regret. I'm glad I own my ETH, and I've been DCAing into ETH for the last 2 years. But yeah, I've definitely come back around to Bitcoin. But what's so tricky is I feel like now that I'm back into it, I feel like that means it's going to drop again. You know, like it is.
You never know.
It's in a
right?
moment right now because of the Blackrock stuff,
Yeah.
because you have you have Fidelity filing for a Bitcoin ETF. This is the tale of two cities, is that you have, on the one hand, so many people in the mainstream telling you crypto are dead, smart financial people, like, again, the All In podcast people who I love, like being like really just kind of like anti-crypto. You have regulators coming after it harder than ever. You have Pudgy saying the US regulatory regime is going to cut off all off-ramps to crypto. And then on the other hand, you have Fidelity and Citibank and Blackrock and making these moves, whether it's through EDX, this exchange that Citibank and others are involved in, and or these ETF filings. And it's like, how do you wrap your head around? How do you reconcile these two stories?
Well, this is where I go back to BlackRock, right? It's like you talk about the all-in guys, you talk about Pudgy, all really smart, interesting people. Yeah. But BlackRock is one of the most powerful companies in the entire world, and they clearly see something here that's bigger than the SEC. I don't. This is not me. Like, don't come after me, U.S. government fans. But BlackRock is more powerful.
Yeah, all the U.S. GovMax. You should listen to overpriced JPEGs.
I would say BlackRock is more powerful than almost any entity in the world, which sounds insane, but I really believe is true. If BlackRock is coming, if BlackRock is coming for it, it's a giant sense. Was like, okay, well, they probably are going to make something happen. Like that's where my brain is at. Like it is a really big vote of confidence. Now you're right. We could be in a small bump for this news and then it'll go down again. But to your point also, like what is Bitcoin at? Like 29 right now? Like
30. It went over 31. It was over 31 yesterday. Or 2 days ago.
It could go down to 15, but if what we're saying here is right, like there's a world where the peak then is 100K, right? Or more. And that's like buying it now, you won't regret it. So I guess this is always that hard question of when to buy crypto or when to buy any asset. Any
DCA,
asset,
just
right?
DCA.
Yeah.
That's why I literally I can't stress. It's too stressful for me. I can't handle it. So I just need to put an automatic buy on and then walk away, because I will. Then my infinite regret will really go crazy if I try and time the market at all. So I just put a recurring buy onto it, and then I don't even have to then I don't beat myself up.
By the way,
unless I
in
did
case
put the
somebody's
recording buy on,
listening,
but-
Carly, what does DCA mean? Because you said DCA.
Oh, dollar cost average in. So basically, like every week, I just buy a certain amount of ETH or like a certain dollar amount of ETH, and now I also do it for Bitcoin, and that means that like it's automatically set. It just buys it for me. It's at the same time every week. I don't have to think about it, and I don't have to.
Guess who did that on the way up on ETH, and then eventually stopped because I couldn't keep doing it. And then when I stopped and haven't done it since, I watched it come back down when I should be doing it. But anyway, I did that all the way up.
That's the classic. That's the classic. But that's kind of what I did with Bitcoin, to be honest. ETH, I've done fine. I even bought more ETH when ETH went to 900. I like did an extra one-time buys. I've done pretty well on my like ETH buys. But anyways, all right, folks. Bit of a long episode today, but it was a fun one. Thank you all as always, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.